This is Gemara Zevachim, Daf Zayin, and all the learning as we close out the month of Elul, as we prepare for Rosh Hashanah, has been sponsored by a close friend of the Daf, as Zchos Aliyas Neshama, for Aster Reyzel Basar Meir, B'siyata Dishmaya, the incredible Kayach HaTa'ira, as we go into the Yom Adin, should be an incredible Aliyas Neshama of Aster Reyzel Basar Meir, and a Melatz Yisher, for her son and for the entire mishpacha. So we're holding on the bottom of Vavam Beis, and we're trying to figure out whether a carbon could affect atonement, kapara, for an avera that was committed after the hafrasha. Again, let's just say this out clearly to start off the day. Ruvain committed a crime, so he separates a carbon. Then he commits another crime. Can the carbon that he separated, he didn't bring it yet. He didn't do the shechita yet. He didn't do any of the avodas yet. When he eventually does those avodas, can that carbon that he prior separated be a ritzoy, be a kapara for an avera that was done afterwards? So we're trying to bring a raya from the kisvei aseres, which the Gemara then says really is the seirei atzeres, the he-goats of Shavuos. And the Gemara wanted to answer on the bottom of Vavam Beis that we're talking about they were mafresh zeh zeh, and therefore there is not a simultaneous afresh of two animals, but rather one animal and then a second. And the reason being, if there was an avera that was committed between the two afreshes. Amar Rav Papa comes along Rav Papa, and Rav Papa responds, Karbana Yisiber Kamrit. You're asking a kasha from the Sirei Aseres for a carbon Sibur. We're going back. We're about 11 lines to the bottom. The first one line is Kamrit. Shiny Karbana Yisibur, the Leiv Bezdin Kamasna Aleim. Says Rav Papa, you can't bring a raya. Why can you bring a raya? Because Bezdin makes a tanai with regard to Karbanos of Sibur that they are conditional. And therefore, when is the second animal going to be mafresh? It will automatically include all the averas. Because Rav Yudah Shmuel, Karbanei Sibur, Sakin Moishachtam Lamashahin. The halacha is that the shechita with a knife directs them to whatever they be, meaning it can include everything. Why? Because of Leiv Bezdin Masne Alehem. Let's just see a quick Rashi. Rashi at the beginning of the white lines over here. I apologize, you can't see Rashi. 1 second. There we go. Rashi at the beginning of the white lines over here says Rashi, Leiv Bezdin, Kamasna Aleim on the second white line. Ha'iskim mitzarchi sibur masna aleim shafilu yafrishu hakayanim bivazachas. It's true. The afrasha was bivazachas. We don't have to make it oshvaru kimta. Still, loy tehei afrasha sa'achar and afrasha. It should not be considered that the animal was designated and separated at samach lakravasai until close to the bringing of the carbon. Why? So the second carbon can work for this, for the averes in between. So responds the Gemara, the carbonos of a tzibur cannot be a raya to a regular case whether a carbon will be able to be meratze, provide a kapara for an aver that was done after the afrasha. There Rav Yosef, there Rav Shmuel, 5 lines to the bottom. Rav Papa, according to Rav Papa, he said to Rav Papa, the Rav Shimon levezde masna aleim. We're going in Shitas Rav Shimon over here. And does Rav Shimon hold of this entire Yisoid? Timidin, a carbon tamid shaloi hitzrachul tzibur, that the tzibur does not need. As we turn over to today's daf, Zayin Amud Aleph, says the Gemara ledivri Rav Shimon. According to Rav Shimon, if we have a carbon tamid that is not needed by the tzibur, ein niftin timidim. They cannot be poided. They cannot be redeemed if they are tamid. If they are complete, if they do not have if they're tamim, if they do not have a blemish. They could be redeemed with a blemish. So the Tab Rashi spells out, Rav Yochanan learns out from the fact that Rav Shimon and the Rabbanan argue that according to Rav Shimon, Leiv Bezdin Masna Aleim, he does not hold off in order to machshir the Karban Tamid Shana Abba Loimar that Im Hiltzrechu Etzrechu V'Emlav Yeikadshim L'Demeim Shifti Osamim Ba'as Chulin B'Loimam. From the fact that Rav Shimon doesn't allow it to be redeemed if it's Tamim shows us he does not hold the Karban to be conditional. Because if it was conditional based on what Bezdin was Masna, he would not have to wait for it to get a mum. So says the Gemara, Va'oid, that's kasha number 1 on Rav Papa. Kasha number 2, Habayim Rav Yamir Rav Zei, Rav Yizir Mia asked Rav Zeira, Siriat Seres, Shekibel Dama B'Shnei Kaisais, if the 2 goats on Shavuos you accepted their blood in 2 cups at the same time, V'Nizik Dama Shal Shvi Shain, Sheni, and the blood of the first goat was thrown, V'Nizik Dama Shal Rishain, you did the Zrika for the first Karban, Sheni, Lamahu Ba. Why do you need the second Zrika? What does the second Karban come to be Mechaber on? What does the Brisa explain? Al Tomash Aru Bein Zrika Shal Zelazeh. If anything happened between the Zrika of the 2 Karbanis. Ad Kan, so what do we see? Lami Ba'ile. What was the Shaila? Elasei Delacher Shchita. The Shaila of the Gemara was, if something happened after the Shchita, in between the Zrika, then we'll have a Ritzoi. Look at me, Baile. There wasn't a Shaila, so we're trying to bring a Raya to what's the status if an Avera, a Mitzvah say, was violated after the Afrosh, the designation of the Karban. We see that wasn't even a Shaila. Says Gemara, no Raya from here. Dilma and Tim Saloima Kamar. Maybe the Gemara is just asking on that side. So the second kasha, the Gemara is concluding is not a kasha. The first kasha is a kasha, and the Gemara ends off without a resolution to its original question. Says the Gemara, Itmar. We're at the 2 dots, about 10 lines down. Says the Brisa, it's going to be, what's the halacha? Rabba Amar Ksheira, Rav Chisda Amar Psula. We have a Karban Taida that was shachted for someone else. It's what we call a Shinui Bailim. What's the halacha? It's Machlekes Rabba and Rav Chisda. Explains the Gemara. Rabba Amar Ksheira, why? Taida L'Shem Taida Nishchata. Lamaisa, it was for the sake of a Taida. Just happened to be, it was for someone else's Taida, but at least it was the same Karban. Chisda Amar Psula, why? L'Shem Shlamim Didei Nechshata. Because the halacha is that this has to be shechted for his own Shlamim. And if you shecht it for his friend's Taida, then it's considered shechting it for a different Karban. It's considered to be a Shinoi Kodesh. Therefore, says Rav Chisda, it's not going to work. Be'inan. Amar Rabba, Mina Min Allah. So says Rabba, where do I know this? Titania, says the Pasik. Ubasir Zevach Taida Shlama of the Yom Akrivai as Zevchai. And the flesh of the Karban Shlamim of the Taida, that is, the flesh of the Karban Taida, that is a Shlamim, B'yoim Hakriva Zevcha, you bring the Karban. So what do we see? We see that the Taida is a form of a Shlamim. So Abachananoi, remember Shem Rav Eliezer, Balalamid, you know the Torah is teaching us in the fact that it says that a Taida is a Shlamim. Taida Sheshachta L'Shem Shlamim is going to be Ksheira. But Shlam Sheshachta L'Shem Taida is going to be Psulim. What is the difference? Taida Kuriya Shlamim, but Vein Shlamim, Kuriya and Taida. A Taida is called a Shlamim, but not vice versa. So explains the Gemara now. Shlamim L'Shem Taida Psula. So if a Shlamim was made as a Taida, it's possible because a Shlamim is not called a Taida. Ha Taida L'Shem Taida is going to be Ksheira. So my love, what does it mean that a Taida L'Shem Taida is going to be kosher? Says the Gemara, must mean that it's not a real Taida, it's a lower level of Taida. And what would that mean to teach me from the Pasuk that a Taida L'Shem Taida is kosher? My love, the Chavrei. it must be referring to the taida of his friend. And that's how, says Rabbah, we're going to see a taida sheshachta l'shem taidas chaveirai is going to be kosher. Answers the Gemara, no raya loy. It means d-day. It means that the taida is shechted for another taida of his own. Meaning, he has more than one taida that he needs to bring, and he shechts it for the other one. But ask the Gemara, but according to that dia, what would the halacha be if you shechted for the taida of your friend? It will come out psula. But then the kasha is a classical kasha. The tani sham l'shem shleida psula. Why does the brisa list a shlamim made as a taida? That's possible. Listni taida l'shem taida. Let it say a taida l'shem the other taida. V'kol shekain shlamim. Let it say taida l'shem taidas chaveirai and kol shekain shlamim, and certainly a shlamim l'shem taida. So the brisa always lists the biggest chiddush. So why does the brisa list the case of taida l'shem shlamim? Answers the Gemara, shlamim l'shem taida didei, it's rechlei. Shlamim, the brisa needs to teach the case of a shlamim for his own taida. Why? Sal kedei techamei, I would have thought. Mei taida, mei de taida kriya shlamim, since the taida is called a shlamim, therefore shlamim nami kriya taida, meaning the logical thought process would be not like the brisa taught, that a shlamim is a taida, taida is a shlamim. They go back and forth. So the brisa had to teach that that's not true. And therefore, so Kamash, the brisa had to teach it's not true, but it's not going to be a raya that it should have said taida l'shem taida, and therefore the Gemara is not a raya to Rabbah, but it's not going to be a kasha either. Says the Gemara, Omar Rava. Now, the Gemara on the topic of Shinei Bailim continues, and you'll see that the first two dinim that we're about to quote should sound familiar. We had these a few days ago back in Daf Gimel. Over there it was quoted B'Shem Rav. Over here it's quoted B'Shem Rava. There are the gerses on this side that change it. Chatas sheshachta l'shem chatas. A chatas that is shechted for a different type of chatas. What's the halacha? Ksheira. The halacha is such a chatas is kosher. Let's look at Rashi for a moment to start off. Rashi in the fifth white line says, "Kun chatas chelev she'nichtasha l'shem chatas tam." Someone who's over two aveiros, they have to be two different chatais, and you shecht one chatas for the other chatas, which parenthetically shows us we're busy discussing kavana, we're busy discussing lishma. We discussed Shini Kodesh, Shini Bailim, the right carbon, the right owner. Now we see, and we really saw this in the previous Gemara, we just didn't explain it clearly. Now we see that even when it's for the same carbon, it has to be for that carbon. Meaning, it's not just chatas, asham, taida. No, it's which chatas. The shechita has to be done for the chatas, for the avir that I did of chelev, for the avir that I did of dam, not just a chatas that was shechted as a chatas. So says Rav Nachum al chatas sheshachta l'shem chatas ksheira l'shem aylat psula. My taima says the Torah v'shachta sal chatas amrachmana. You have to shecht it as a chatas v'ari chatas shem chatas nishchata. Therefore, if it's for a chatas, it's called l'shem aylat psula. Din number one, that there's a din of it has to be for the right carbon, and if a chatas is for the wrong carbon, then it's going to be pesul. And of course, this is the original din in our Mishnah. The kol zevachim shazavchan shalol lishmonis kashiran chutz min pesach and a chatas. That if a chatas is done shalol lishma, then it's psula. The Amar Rava continues the Gemara. Chatas sheshachta al misha mechuyev chatas. If a chatas is shechted for someone else, shini bailim, even though that other person is as well chayiv achatas. What's the halacha? Psula. But amisha b'chayiv ayla, then it's going to be kesheira. This is what we saw, that it's like its type, not like its type. This is where we saw back in Daf Gimel that achatas l'shem achatas to someone else, because it's a similar achatas but it's for the wrong bailim, it's possible. My time, what's the reason? A love, it has to be for yourself. V'loy al chaveiroi, and not your friend. And we explain chaveiroi dem yodidei. B'mechuyev kabara kamaisa, it has to be a friend that has a similar kabara to you. And therefore, if it's for someone else that has a different kabara, then that's not going to invalidate it. It's for someone else that has the same kabara, meaning a similar chatas, then it will have a psul of shinoi bailim. So that is two halachas of Rava, perhaps Rav, that we've seen prior. And really we're bringing them as a bit of hakdama, as we'll see right now, as we quote a third halacha. 8 lines to the bottom. V'amar Rav, chatas sheshachta al mi she'ina mechuyev klum. You shechta chatas for someone that's not chayiv anything at all. Psula. Why? She'in l'chadim b'Yisrael, she'in mechuyev asay. Because everyone has some level of chayiv, everyone has done some level of lack of mitzvahs asay, and everyone at some level has to bring a chatas. V'amar Rava, and Rava continues, chatas mechaberes al chayvei asay mikal v'chayim her. Al chayvei krisos mechaberes, mikal v'chayim. A chatas works a chayvei asay, and that's the reason why we just said in l'chabi Yisrael, she'enim mechuyev an asay. And asay means one did not do a positive mitzvah. One did not put on tefillin. One did not do something he had to do. One did not shake the lulav. So it says Rava, chatas is mechaber. How do I know? If al chayvei krisos mechaberes, says the Gemara 4 lines at the bottom, v'chatas could work for someone that is mechayev kares. Chayvei asay l'kol shkein. Certainly it could work for a chayvei asay. And therefore, it says the Gemara, if you shech the chatas for someone that's seemingly not chayv anything, it's going to be psula. Why? Because he is chayv something. And therefore, it's going to be similar to a chatas, sheshachta misha b'chayiv chatas. It's going to be psula. It says the Gemara, l'meimra de bas minai. So it sounds like it's bas mina, that an oila is in the same chatas as a category as a chatas. So I just said that this person is chayiv something, so he's chayiv a chatas. So the answer is he's not really chayiv a chatas, because if the whole vart is he's chayiv because of an asay, what's he really chayiv? He's really chayiv an oila. So says the Gemara, l'meimra, does this mean to say that the bas minai, that if someone is chayiv an oila, it sounds like you're in the same category as chayiv a chatas, and that's why it's going to be psula. But that's shver. We just said it's psula. Mishav chayiv oila is kshera. So if ein l'chabi Yisrael she'ein l'chayiv asay, so what is your friend mechayiv and oila? So if I shech something for my friend, if I shech my chatas for his oila, it should be kshera. So why are we saying now that he's going to be chayiv something and it's psula? Is it an oila or is it a chatas? Says the Gemara, as we turn over to Zayin Amid Beis, Mikabai loy Mikiva loy mechapra. Says the Gemara, even though we just said that the chatas will work for an oila, says the Gemara, but not fully. Mikiva loy mechapra, mikufya mechapra. It only works peripherally. It doesn't give you a real kapara, and therefore it's going to be kashera, because therefore it's going to be considered as if it's not really an oila. Why? Because it only gives you a partial kapara. Says the Gemara of Amar Rava, another halacha of Rava, Zayin Amud Beis, the second line, oila sheshachta shalei lishma, asr lizrik dama shalei lishma, which really is a direct offshoot of our Mishnah, that if an oila you messed up and you shechta shalei lishma, you're not allowed to do the zrika shalei lishma, but rather you have to do the zrika, of course, lishma. Iba yisei makra, iba yisei masvara. This should sound familiar. We had this back in Daf Beis. Iba yisei makra, ma'aseh v'sechet tishmar. That you got to watch what comes out of your mouth. And the pasuk ends off, neder nidava. For there we learned out if it's not a neder, if you didn't bring it appropriately, then it should be a nidava, meaning you have to keep on doing as much as possible. Iba yisei masvara. Or we could learn out a svara that what? Mishum deshaniba. V'chulu kidereish lakish, as we saw, kidereish parak, we saw at the beginning of the parak, that what? Just because you messed up once, you should keep on messing up. 2 svarais. Why? Just because you messed up the shchita, you should not mess up the zrika. V'amar Rava continues, Rava another halacha, 7 lines down. Oila haba lachar misa shachta. Oila shaba haba lachar misa. If an oila is brought after the death of the owner, shachta b'shinei kodesh psula, but b'shinei bailim it is kshera. If the shechita is done with a shinoi kodesh, you had in mind for the wrong carbon, then it's going to be pasul. But b'shinei bailim is going to be kshera. Why? Dein bailim lachar misa. Because there's no such thing as a bailim after misa. Meaning, what is the case of an oila ba lachar misa? Talking about a case of the owner died and we're trying to figure out what to do with his carbon. So if after the owner is no longer used shechta for the wrong carbon, then it's going to mess it up. But if you shechta for the wrong bailim, it's not going to mess it up because there's no real bailim at all. V'Rab Pinchas brei de Rav Ami Amar, says Rab Pinchas brei de Rav Ami, yesh bailim lachar misa. Says Gemara, Amli Rav Ashi de Rab Pinchas brei de Rav Ami, Davka kamar mar yesh bailim lachar misa. What do you mean that you're commenting that there are bailim lachar misa? Are you saying Davka yesh bailim lachar misa? And therefore it's going to mess up the carbon, and therefore you have to bring another ayla. Or maybe you're telling me that if there are many assays, I'll bring kapara. Amarle, indeed, Davka kamina. I was saying it Davka, I was coming to argue in Rava, and that what? If it's brought for a different bailam, it will passel it up, even though the owner is no longer. You're going to have to bring a different ayla. The Amar Rava, about 14 lines down. The first one line is Amar Rava. I think this is the 7th and final halacha that we're quoting from Rava. Ayla darain hi. What is an ayla? Fundamental memra of Rava. You know what an ayla is? An ayla is a gift. It's a gift to God. Rashi explains, an ayla inay ba lechaper alasei kapara mamish. After one did tshuva, after one really got a kapara already, then he ba'alak balas panim. It's coming to show good face. Ka'adim shesarach b'melech. One who rebelled, did bad to the king. V'ritu aydei praklitin. Then what happened? He made good to the king. And then, so then what do you do the next time you see the king? You got into a fight. You made up. Now the next time you see the person, maybe Dar and Biyadi, you bring a gift. So says Rava, the Ayla is not brought to affect a kapara, but rather what? It's being brought as a gift. Says the Gemara, what's the case? If we're talking about a case that the person did not do tshuva yet, then Zevach Rishayim Teiva, you can't bring a carbon at all. V'yidiga tshuva, v'yidam, he did tshuva already. Hatanya, but we learned in a brayso. Avraham mitzvah say v'shav, lo yizaz misham ad shamoich l'nai. If he did tshuva, he doesn't move from his place till he gets a kapara. He's immediately forgiven. So rather, therefore, says Rava, so what are you doing? So what is the ayla's purpose? Therefore, must show us that what is the ayla? All it is merely a gift. We have a raya. Rav Shimon chatas lama hiba. Lama ba says the Gemara chatas lechaber. Lama ba lefnei ayla. Why is chatas bar lefnei ayla? Says the Gemara. You know why? Lefraklich enichnas. It's one who comes, like someone who comes on someone else's behalf. Ritzay praklit nichnas. First he comes and he gets forgiveness. Then then comes the gift afterwards. So explains the Gemara, the Chatas comes, and the Chatas gets the kapara. After you get the kapara of the Chatas, then you bring the oil as a gift. And of course, always siyata d'shmaya, to be learning how an oil works, learning about kapara, about tshuva, mamish, as we prepare for the Yom Hadin HaGadol v'Hanoira b'siyata d'shmaya. And we continue, we're smack in the middle of the Amid of Zayin Amid Beis. Chutz min ha-Pesach v'ha-Chatas. That all karbanos, that this is going back to the din of the Mishnah, kol azvachim shezachzul shalosh shmaner k'sheira chutz min ha-Pesach and ha-Chatas. The Pesach and Chatas are going to be entirely pasul. Says the Gemara, Pesach minolan, dechsev shamar chodesh ha'aviv, v'aziz ha-Pesach. And from here we darshan she'yikol asiyos of the shem Pesach. Ashkechan says the Gemara shinei kodesh, so we see that asiyah has to be the shem Pesach. And if not, it's going to be pasul. Shinei bailim minolan, how do we know? If you did it for the wrong owner, dechsev. V'amartem zevach pesach hu, says the Torah further, and they said it should be a zevach pesach, shtei zvich l'shem pesach. And meinini l'shinoi kodesh, because we just learned it out, and yini l'shinoi bailim. Says ma'ashchan the mitzvah. So we have a raya that it's a mitzvah, has to be done for the right purpose. But says the Gemara, le'ake minalan, how do you know it holds it back? How do you know that the pesach is going to be pasul? Amar krav zevach pesach l'Hashem eloi kecha. Another pasuk teaching us, an extra pasuk teaching us to show us that it's going to be pasul. Maskiv la Rav Safra, 1 second. I've zevachta, this second pasuk you just quoted. Lachi udalsa, do we need it for this? I mean, Rav Nachman, we need it for something else. Rav Nachman, Rav Ravua. Minayin le moisar pesach shekarav shlamim. How do we know that the residual pesach is brought as a shlamim? What is a moisar pesach? A moisar pesach is if you lose your carbon pesach. Let's look at Rashi very quickly. I know we're running out of time. Moisar pesach sha'ava v'nischaper. You lost your carbon. V'nischaper ba'achar v'nimsar rishon. You find the first one. What do you do with the first one? Says the Gemara, you bring it as a shlamim. How do you know that? Shnemer zvachta pesach l'Hashem lekecha. Tzayin ubakar. V'haloi ein pesach ba. Element akvasim and izim. The Torah says that a pesach is a kvasim and izim. So what does the Torah mean if a pesach is a son ubakar? Mikan l'meiser pesach shtei shehei l'davar haba min atenim min abakar. That the meiser pesach should be utilized if you find the original carbon pesach that was lost. You already got your kapara. Should be utilized for a type of carbon that's brought with the son in a bakar, which is what? Omayniu shlamim. So says the Gemara, we see that the pasuk of Zevachta Pesach L'Hashem L'Kechas, you need it for something else. So how can you tell me that it's brought and teaches me that a shinoi, kaida shinoi bailim by a Pesach will invalidate, will passel? Elam Rav Zafra, Zevachta Pesach, Lich Rav Nachman. Zevachta Pesach, you're right, is needed for Rav Nachman, like we just said about a Meiser Pesach. Shomer es Chedesh Aviv, that pasuk, it teaches us le mitzvah, b'shinoi kodesh. That teaches us that it's a mitzvah by Shinoi Kodesh. V'amartem zevach pesach, that teaches us b'shinoi bailim, le mitzvah. Excuse me, one more time. Shabbos chosh avi le mitzvah b'shinoi Kodesh. V'amartem zevach pesach b'shinoi bailim le mitzvah. Ho, the last word of lo is the akev beinacha v'acha. So the actual word of ho teaches us that it's ma'akev Shinoi Kodesh and Shinoi bailim. V'ashichan zvicha. Now says okay, great. This is only about the shchita. Shar avodas minayim, hayel v'gali, gali. Says the Gemara, once it's revealed that by one avodah it's going to apply to all avodas. Teretz number 1, why carbon pesach passes if it's shaloi lishma. Rav Ashi Amar, no, hayel v'gali, gali layim, we don't say that. El avodas minalin, how do we know shar avodas? There's the Kabbalah, halach and tzrika. T'chsev, zayzat teretz hayel mincha v'kaimer. V'tanya, we learned in a braysa. B'yom savasos b'nei Yisrael la'akrev es karbaneihem. Zebachar u'maiser u'pesach ekishu ha'kasav l'shlam. And the Torah equates all the karbanas together, as we've seen this drush already. Ma'ashlam ben shinei kodesh ben shinei bailim bin l'mitzvah. Avkol ben shinei kodesh ben shinei bailim l'mitzvah. And therefore, it's like ukishlamim. Ma'ashlam ben zvicha ben shar avaydais. Lo yichal lakta behem l'mitzvah. Pesach lo tichlik b'hai ben zvicha l'shar avaydais. Cave, it's all going to be the same. But if this is true, says the Gemara, now we have an extra drasha. Elahu lamali, what do you do with the oh? Kedetanya nemer bepesach hu b'shchita le'akev aval asham loy nemer bayhu al achar haktaris hemurim vu atzmei shlohiktu remurav. It's going to be kosher. So the reason extra who is going to be there is to teach us halacha about the asham. That regarding the carbon pesach, it says by the shechita to teach us that if you did a shalei l'shema, you're not going to do anything else. It's going to be entirely pasul. But by an asham, it says who to teach us that only the rest of it's going to be pasul. But only what if we shalei huktu emurav, then it's going to be kosher. Pick it up from here. B'siyata dishmaya.